the culprit, so to say, was KEMSA. The action taken with regard to those allegations of some 7.8 billion shillings. Firstly, the EACC approached it in a two-phase mode. That is to say, they looked at public officers who were alleged to have participated in those alleged losses. And the second phase will be to the suppliers, some 78 plus companies locally and elsewhere. As regards the first phase, some 52 persons of interest have been called in to write statements, and they have. And the documentation with regard to the payments has been secured and has been analyzed. And as we speak, a report has been tendered to the Director of Public Prosecutions with regard to those cases involving public officers. And the DPP is currently reviewing that material and will at some stage in the very near future decide on whether or not prosecutions will proceed.
Yeah.
Even as that is going on, the EACC has embarked and is progressing well on the second phase, which entails, as I've just said, the companies that were the suppliers. That is the current state of play.
Yeah. What are some of the lessons you think we should learn from the relationship between the Ministry of Health and KEMSA, for example, so that there's not any backpedaling and also it was me, it wasn't me, she said, who said, nobody said. How can that be made more efficient?
Well, this will be informed more when we have completed the investigations, because there'll be administrative issues, there'll be legal issues that come into play. We will examine the legal framework, and we did this with the other cases that have preceded this, like anyway, it'll come to mind. But as CAP Secretary Mutahi Kagwe observed earlier, our institutions are only as good as the persons who lead them. And as His Excellency has said, and persistently in the war against corruption, he has led from the front by personal example. That is very, very, very critical. And as leaders, whether it is at ministerial level, whether it is units like KEPSA and so on, the leadership must be above board.
Okay.
And we assume in a time when we are caught up in a situation like we have, that we're good. Of course we're good.
Yeah.
But we forget one fundamental. There are people out there working night and day to take advantage of these pandemics, these very circumstances, to make money. If you don't believe me, go read the 1948 novel by Albert Camus, who is a French author, who detailed the effects of a bubonic plague and the effects that has on men.
Okay.
There was an old pharmacist there who was hoarding medicines and selling it at sky-high profit.
Okay.
We have the same in this country.
All right.
We must say as a nation, no, we are not going there.
All right. Thank you so much. Governor Oparanya, you've been on the receiving end. The Control of Budget report mentioned that the counties could only account for 3 billion shillings out of 13 billion shillings. At the time, it needs to be made clear it was at the time. But how do you rate the performance of counties when it comes to the resources? How much was allocated to you and how well did you use it?
Thank you very much. First of all, you must understand that there were county response committees that were formed, and it was the responsibility of these county committees to come up with measures to contain the spread of the disease. And in the process, these very committees came up with work plans, financial requirements that was required, and this was the coordinating committee. At the initial stage, because as counties, we were not sure where we were going to get funds, we agreed each county to prioritize their own requirement. Through that process, counties were able to put together 6.1 billion through environments, and the amount varied from one county to the other. I think the lowest county provided about 10 million, and the highest county provided 400 million. This is the figures that we got at the Secretariat. But at the national level, because when the disease started spreading, of course, through His Excellency, he organized extraordinary summit where we met, and we requested as county government that we needed support. In the process, we were given 5 billion from the national government through the order of His Excellency, the President. Now, it reached a time when we thought that we could motivate frontline health workers. And when other counties were thinking of how much to pay, we engaged SRC, and SRC came up with standardized or uniform payments to these to the frontline workers, and through the Ministry of Health, we were given 2.36 billion. That is the only money I can say that we received directly from the national government. But however, we did receive 350 million shared equally to all counties from TANITA, 350 that went direct to level 2 and level 3 hospitals or health centers. And then finally, we received a donation of 30 million to specified counties, about 13 counties from the EU. But this money unfortunately never went direct to the counties. The EU used independent agents to carry out activities in the few selected counties. And that's the money that we received. For the 5 billion we received, a special audit is being carried out by the Treasury, by our internal audit, National Internal Audit Office. For the last 2 weeks, they have been in the counties, and we are yet to receive a report.
Yeah, but from where you stand, would you confidently face Kenyans and tell them there was value for money? Their money was used prudently at the counties.
I can tell you that this money was prudently used. But as I speak now, not all of this money has been spent because of the bureaucracy of moving from one financial year to the other financial year. Because there were supplementary budgets to be undertaken because it was towards the end of the year. And also there was a shortage of some goods on the market. So some of those goods had to be imported from overseas. You could not get ventilators, you could not get beds, they had to be imported. Some of them are just arriving now, but there was proper commitment because the county response committee had to come up with work plans and commitments. So this money was actually committed, although it has not been exhausted.
Okay. So there's still some change as well.
There is
There's a
still
lot
some
of
change.
change here.
Yes.
So let's bring in Jane Karuku on this. Yours is a different story. Yours is what the president called unprecedented unity of purpose. How much did the ordinary Kenyans and the partners, everybody else, how much did they raise towards the COVID-19 fund, and how was it used?
Thank you, Trevor. I'll try and answer all your questions at once so you don't come back to me. I've learned what you're asking. So I think when we were created by Your Excellency, I think he was very gracious. He gave me a great team. And I can tell you, you can imagine how our board meetings went between James Mwangi, Michael Joseph, and others, and Joshua. But it was a lot of fun. And we were also lucky to get C.S. Matiang'i and a very good secretary in Kennedy Kihara. And Governor Oparanya was also part of that. So what we did immediately is that we knew our objective was to raise funds from the private sector and others. We formed an entity to protect ourselves, so we are a company limited by a guarantee with a board of directors. That's what we know how to do best. We formed committees, and we were laser focused in terms of what we were going to do. So we only chose two things: supporting the health sector and supporting our communities in livelihoods. We brought on PwC, Deloitte, and KPMG, and Ernst & Young to make sure that we can fully account, and Trevor can answer you 2 years from now whether our money was well used. So we did it up front. We also brought experts to support us with health. So the health committee, which was led by Dr. James Mwangi, we adopted Professor Masharia, the great ENT specialist, and a group of medical doctors, Union, KPMDU, Nursing Council, and clinical officers, etc., because we didn't know what was going on. This was tough. We then made a few principles as a board. We said, whatever happens, we are going to pay a premium for buying local. So we said any money raised in Kenya is going to be spent in Kenya so we can sustain and build Kenya jobs. We then said that anybody who's going to help us with this work is going to do it for free. Trevor, we didn't even take a cup of tea.
Oh, wow. That deserves a round of applause. But how much did you raise?
So we raised, we had in kind and in cash. In cash, we raised just over 2.6 billion shillings. We coordinated food worth about 450 million. And then we received food, which the KDF were gracious to store for us at Kawa Barracks, worth another 430 million. We then decided to prioritize the spend, how we spend the money very quickly.
Yeah.
Health, PPE was the biggest challenge. In our committees, there was Ministry of Health representation in Dr. Kariuki. So we decided to work with the local manufacturers to do fit-for-purpose PPEs. And I can tell you, the doctors, even today in the morning, I asked them, they are confirming they are good. And Betty and other people have started exporting into the region. So that's good. We worked together with Kenya Association of Manufacturers. And Phyllis, who's the CEO, worked very hard together with the health guys, sometimes even up to 1 a.m. at night, visiting factories to see whether we can produce. And Your Excellency, we were very shocked at the capacity we have in Kenya. We were even embarrassed. We visited Kitui with the governor. We visited across the country, Nakuru, a lot of places. And I can guarantee we can buy Kenya and build Kenya. And I think I like what Governor Kuti said. Let's get back. So in terms of the other things, so we bought PPEs, 1.5 billion we've allocated. We chose 65 COVID-related hospitals across the country and a few others like Madari and the military hospital just across. And we are also supporting Kiambu with Tigoni Hospital because it's by the road, it takes a lot. So together with Kiambu County, we are refurbishing Tigoni Hospital, Buy Kenya, Build Kenya principle. Yeah. We then bought, so for the PPEs, we've promised the country that in the 65 hospitals, for 18 months, we are going to provide PPE. If we don't need, we can divert that money. But that's a promise we made. Yeah. We then decided to give masks to our communities in Nairobi. We bought 2.6 million masks at the price of 100 million shillings, and we distributed, supported very well by Ngao and county commanders and other people, partners that we were working with. The other thing we've done is we supported the doctors with psychosocial support, worth about 95 million. I know you want to stop me, but I'm answering all your questions, Trevor. And then the last thing is what was really, really pleasing to all of us was the money we gave to the needy communities, about 100,000 people in Kenya, and in Nairobi and the environs. We gave 1,000 shillings per week for a month, worth about 400 million shillings. Safaricom gave us a moratorium from Fuliza.
Yeah, I was
So
about
told
to ask
us
you about Fuliza right now.
to tell our people to remove the money. They had a moratorium of 48 hours.
Okay.
Otherwise, it was going to be swallowed or measured by Fuliza. So thank you, Peter. So that was good. So what have I not answered you? So have we used our money well? We think so.
Yeah.
Because we think we have shifted, transformed the local industry. And I think when we give back to Kenya, it's that we can do anything.
Okay.
That work with all those manufacturers was done within 2 weeks.
All right.
And there was a question of Your Excellency, then I shut up. He said, were we slow? Imagine if this capacity was in the country. We could have had PPEs on the day.
Yeah.
Because all we needed to do was order, but it was not there, and people had to develop. Thank you very much.
I'll actually wind up with the lessons that we've learned in just a bit, but let me bring in Sid on this. Sid, you represent the international community. What was the biggest role of the UN in fighting COVID-19 in Kenya, and are you happy with how the money was spent?
Perhaps it's important that I start at the very beginning, and the very beginning is in 2017, if you recall, President Kenyatta actually declared a national drought emergency in February. So what we were confronting, and people need to understand this, is a massive blow because of the drought itself, which had been simmering over time, and then comes the floods. Then we have the COVID, and then we have a locust invasion, and it was major. So essentially, Kenya was confronted by a triple crisis, ladies and gentlemen. It was not just COVID. And if you were to ask me on a report card on Kenya's performance, it's an A+, and I say that without equivocation. Secondly, let's look at what the United Nations family did. And I really want to commend the leadership of CS Yatani and CS Eugene Mwamba. By March of 2020, we sat down together at the United Nations family, repurposed $45 million or 4.5 billion Kenya shillings from our existing UN Development Assistance Framework to respond to this public health crisis. An additional appeal was put out on the 9th of April, again together with CS Yatani and Eugene Wamalwa, and approximately $58 million was raised, or about 5.8 billion Kenya shillings. In the meantime, in consultation between President Kenyatta and the UN Secretary General, an additional $10 million was brought in, or 1 billion shillings, for the construction of a hospital, which should be ready in the next 2 weeks with Nairobi Hospital, not only to respond to COVID, but something to leave behind as a post-COVID care facility for a 100-bed hospital. On all counts, let me just state this categorically, that we don't have any issues with all the investments we've made so far.
That is a good point, because what Jiku has always been concerned was the money stolen.
I also want to, but then, the UN is a member states organization. It's not isolating, it's not on its own. And frankly, we would not have been able to do this had this not been for the absolute and unconditional support of the European Union, the United States, China, the United Kingdoms, Russia, France, Japan, the Nordics, India, Ireland, Germany, Netherlands. I mean, absolutely spectacular. And I really want to single out China for a moment, because the speed with which they were able to send PPEs and supplies, not just to Kenya, but across the 54 countries in Africa, was meritorious on all counts. So it needs to be said as it is. Yeah. With the European Union, for example, we are working very closely with CS Joe Macheru's office in order to digitize procurement, digitize land legislation. So I think it will be technology and innovation that will help us to overcome some of the perceived challenges. Yeah. But on all counts, as the resident coordinator to Kenya, as the UN's resident coordinator to Kenya, I'm very proud to serve in a country which has not just dealt with a triple crisis, but done so with great aplomb.
All right. Thank you so much. And I'll give you each 30 seconds to respond to this question, because we only have about 10 minutes. I know time flies. I'll start with Dr. Muya on this. What are the lessons that we've learned going forward And do you think we responded to the pandemic in the right way, sufficiently, like the president asked? Were we sufficient in our response to the pandemic?
Yeah, thank you. The lessons learned. First, it is the fact that we can deal with a challenge which is not normal. And that ties with what Sid has just said, because we had multiple challenges which were rolling and coming one after another one. And so, from also a resource mobilization point of view, it proved to us that we can raise resources using our networks and raise resources that are as cheap as possible. And also the fact that we can mobilize resources very quickly. But if I can also tie this answer to a question that you have asked, I want also to say we were able, against a lot of demands of resources, to very easily think about how to ration the money that we had, how to allocate, and how to prioritize. And that was using the frameworks of our public finance management mechanism, where we have got a very clear framework there. You've got to follow a budgeting process. And so that was a very, very important learning lesson. But then also on the expenditure side, we also learned that we can live with a lot less than we normally live with. Because we were able to curtail on a lot of expenditure. Yeah. And we went through the financial year well. And as you said, there's still some change, yes, which is remaining on the COVID money, about 40 billion.
Okay. I'm not sure whether that's a good thing coming from the Treasury. If we can live with less than what we have, it means we should all brace ourselves for tougher times. Madam Karuku, I'd like to come to you on our change also. And what do you intend to do with the rest of the money, and what are the lessons that you've learned so far?
Yeah, so let me start with the lessons. I think the lessons is how we quickly came together, private sector, individual citizens, and government. And we tried to approach this pandemic from a resource perspective. We had people giving us 100 shillings via the M-Pesa, and we had Dr. James Mwangi giving us a very significant contribution of 300 million shillings. We also had some development partners chip in a bit. The more important was a spirit of giving. So we got very many calls in our secretariat about how can I, as a church group, as a family, as youth, go and donate somewhere else. We had overwhelming requests. I want to contribute my time to your board, to your activities. What can I do? Yeah. So there's a real good thing that Kenyans have from a spirit, and I think we should never forget that. The change, I don't think things are over. We don't know. I guess we don't know, unless today we are being told there is no more COVID. So the change is to help on any other urgent issue that we may need. Yeah. We still have some people who want to give us money, I think. So I think we continue to fight on.
Okay. Yeah. Attorney General, 30 seconds on the lessons we've learned and the sustainability ways going forward.
Thank you. As I said earlier, we're going to be looking at policies and procedures at KEMSA and the relationship between them and the ministry. And the example I was citing earlier, which escaped my mind, was the National Youth Service, where there were similar problems. And arising from that, there was a review report which was prepared, very extensive document, and handed over to the ministry concerned. And they are benefiting from that immensely. But there is one very important aspect that I must emphasize. Yeah. And that is this. People will be prosecuted arising from what has happened at KEMSA. We as a people must learn. His Excellency earlier spoke about that unprecedented unity of purpose. Add to that effort. Add to that the most significant of them, purpose. Okay. It's got to be in our minds as Kenyans. Yeah. It's got to be in our hearts as Kenyans. Who does this? It is we leaders, we who are charged. Whether in the private sector, like my sister to my left, or whether in the public domain. And what happens when these people come to court? We start talking about our tribe, our people being finished. I hope to God we can desist from that and allow the law to take its course to its logical conclusion. You talk about buy Kenya, build Kenya.
Yes.
Why don't we act Kenyan for Kenyans?
Okay.
Act as AG
Yeah.
for Kenyans, as a Kenyan.
Okay.
And if we do that across the divide with my good friend, the governor here as chair,
Yeah.
the three arms of government are here represented with patriotism,
Yeah.
then we have a chance to give a truly purposeful legacy to our children who will come after us.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Sid, 30 seconds.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
the pandemic has reminded us the primacy of universal health coverage. I commend you, President Kenyatta, for having made that as an important part of your legacy. And as far as the world is concerned, it has become abundantly clear. It was a Greek philosopher called Herophilus who said, without health, we have nothing. And the pandemic has just proved that to us. It's not about if there's going to be a next pandemic, it's about when it's going to happen. And I think our preparedness in getting universal health coverage right is the pathway forward.
Okay.
Thank you.
Governor, very briefly.
Now, when we
Raise your microphone just a bit.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think when we received the 5 billion, there was quite hesitant by some county governments to spend the money. Because as you know, EACC is hanging on everybody's head. So people were very hesitant. So in the future, I think what is required is proper guidelines. When such a money is released to counties, there must be proper guidelines. Secondly, in institutions like the county assemblies, they don't know how to deal with emergencies. They keep on playing their own politics. And it took time for some of the counties actually to pass their supplementaries. And the institution like control of budget should know how to respond when we have emergencies. Lastly, we must also have, I don't know if there is a national policy on dealing with the infectious diseases.
Okay.
If it is there, then the capacity, the counties have the capacity have not been built at the county level, so that they understand that when such a thing happens, how do we deal it?
All right.
Lastly, our working together as county government and national government, it has helped to contain this disease.
All right. Thank you so much. A round of applause for my panelists as they walk out. That is the end of it. Thank you so much. Just kindly leave your microphones there. They'll be sanitized. And now, I'd like to call, you can walk out to the right. Thank you so much. I'd like to call upon my colleague, Joy Doreen Bira from DW to moderate the next session. It's about building back better lives and livelihoods. But first, I'd like to draw your attention to the screen over there. We're going to run a short video for you just to see what we mean when we say we are growing back better and stronger. My name is Trevor Mbija. Thank you so much for listening.
Hunger is very, very terrible. Somebody is hungry, he can't do anything. So now is COVID-19. People have so much problem of food. They lost their job. That's why our now main function we are focusing as many people as we can feed. Present time we are feeding 2,400 people. In St. Paul Children's Home, we are feeding 1,500 every day. At the same time, we give food, we give knowledge also.
Karibu kwa Recreational Food for Life Kitchen. Mimi naitwa Jacob Usheng. So because the management walituomba kama tunaweza kaa ili tusaidie those who wenye hawajiwezi. We have been staying here for 2 months now. We accepted to sacrifice. Tusione familia yetu. so that we can stay here and help those ones. We're praying that this pandemic goes away and then we go back and unite with our family.
Mimi naitwa Lavangadas. Huu mpango wa chakula nakumbuka nilipokuja hapa mwaka wa 1995. Chairman wetu Umapati Das aliniambia niwe nikipeleka gari ikibeba hii chakula. Kawa naenda siku 7 kwa siku, Monday to Sunday. Tunabeba masufuria makubwa, watoto kule mwingine anakuja hata na kasuku. Tunawapekulia na wakiona gari tunasikia Hare Krishna wamekuja, Hare wamekuja. Na wakati huo nakwambia wa zamani nilikuwa napatia watoto 7,000 kwa wiki. Lakini siku hizi sababu ya Covid-19 hatutaki watoto sasa, mambo imegeuka. Sababu watoto hawajui social distancing. Tunalete wale watu wazima wanatuambia uko na watoto 5, tunakupatia sahani 7 sababu ya wewe na watoto wako 5 na mzee wako.
COVID is primarily a disease that affects the respiratory system, and therefore we've had to deal with it as a health challenge and to ensure that we minimize the spread of the virus. The Kenyan business community has spent time and really risen up to the task to produce necessary medical commodities that used to be imported. Personal protective equipment, masks, and ventilators, and all these products have been previously imported. But I'm actually quite glad to note that in the space of 2 weeks, the Kenyan business community had adjusted themselves to be able to supply these goods. And currently, we enjoy goods that are made in Kenya.
And as we stand, indeed, we are now exporting PPEs and face masks. We are very, very far towards developing the ventilators. And as we speak today, the one by Kenyatta University has already been certified by Kenya Bureau of Standards.
The other important thing that has come out during COVID is the issue of technology and the fact that the 4th Industrial Revolution is here with us. So issues around the Internet of Things, 3D printing, incorporation of technology into the manufacturing sector and also into our supply chains. We have seen e-commerce take a front line during this period.
And as we start opening our businesses, opening our schools, opening our places of worship, this is a young man who has responded to it by coming and developing thermal guns, which are all locally manufactured.
Good evening or good afternoon to each and every one of us. My name is Joy Doreen Bira, and I'm a business journalist here in Kenya. Because we've been sitting for quite some time, and I know that many of us came in here driven, and we only took the stairs up. I would like to request that we stand up for just a few seconds to stretch out a bit. Yes, and I was told that half of us here fall in the category where we need to keep active. So I would like for us to stretch out our hands to the front, yeah, and to the back. Yeah, now we can have a sit. I'm sure that's just good enough. All right, ladies and gentlemen, my panel basically focuses on the future, what we can do going forward, how we can build back better, and use some of the lessons that we have learned during this period to even do better. Because as we all know, since the pandemic hit, it wasn't just Kenya, but the entire global economy was kind of a damsel in distress. So we want to look at some of the lessons we've picked out and what we can do going forward. And my first question is going to be the 5th question that His Excellency the President asked. Have we built the ability and speed in our system as we de-escalate the COVID measures? have we built the ability and speed in our system as we de-escalate the COVID measures? And also looking at the current state of the economy, I would like to pose this question to Ambassador Okori Yatani, who is the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury and Planning.
Foremost, let me take this opportunity to thank for this opportunity to put a few things right, to share from where we sit in the National Treasury. You are aware that, we've been hit by this shock like no other, no experience, no reference point, any time in history of this country. And therefore, IMF, which is one of the most important financial institutions, predicted doom for the global economy. They predicted a growth of negative 4.9% of GDP for all economies across the globe. That is massive. And through this, and then Kenya, they had predicted both in Kenya and the region that we are going to have a negative growth of 1%. And faced by the circumstance, we had to come in and understand how are we going to deal with it. Of course, trade has been affected, the productive sector has been affected, the financial services have been affected, and therefore also there is the compelling need to continue servicing the country, particularly in expending more on the health sector. And as a result of this, and under the direction of our president, we are to come out and identify what are the critical elements that needs to be underscored. One, that there has to be a reason as to why we should contain sustaining liquidity in the economy. We have to cushion business, create, if not create, but at least sustain the jobs that are there. And additionally, there are also a significant number of this country, Kenyans, who either lost jobs or lost opportunities, and therefore they needed to be supported. Those were the parameters that we are looking at. And that's how we came with the first line of intervention, by coming up with a combination of both fiscal and monetary measures, by making sure the economy remains liquid. How did we do it? We had to take an equivalent of a pay cut as a government to reduce on the VAT from 16 to 14%. We had to reduce on income tax, both for corporate and individuals. Additionally, we had to forego taxes for any Kenyan who is working, who is earning 24,000 Kenyan shilling per month. The net sum of all these, additionally, we also put pressure on governments, both national and the county government, to honor payment of pending bills. We had to carry out a refund of VAT to the tune of 10 billion. Additionally, we also support the vulnerable segment within our society by providing resources to the tune of 10 billion cash. The net sum of addition on the monetary front, the governor of CBK is here. We had to reduce the central bank lending rates from 8.25% to 7.25%. We also had to ask the suspension of listing of loan defaulters in the credit bureau. In addition to a number of other interventions, including even taxes at the lower level.
Right.
And as a result of this, we had to forego Kenya shilling 172 billion in form of lost revenue for the government. But we also did heavy investment, particularly in the areas of the informal settlement, by making new roads, by constructing over 100 boreholes, doing also health facilities. And the net sum of all these is to increase the agile levels of our people, and with a view of also fighting the spread of the pandemic. Now, we came to the second layer. The second layer, because that was the response to the initial shock. But in the medium time, we also came up with a stimulus package, where our motivation is to make sure that we will not only create jobs, but provide livelihood for the people. That's why you see the Kazi Mutani. There works along all these, and the net sum of all these is to substitute mechanization of contracts or, public labor using local labor.
Right.
Making sure that, at the end of the day, we have decent work to do. We can also have money in the pocket and also support the local economy.
So would you say we have built the ability and the speed in our systems to de-escalate?
Very much.
Yeah.
Were it not for those immediate intervention, things will have been different.
All
And
right.
that's why Kenya is different from the rest of the region. And how is it different? All the vital indicators of the economy are actually, we have disproved the prediction that across the globe. We were expected to grow at a negative 1%, but now our growth is at 2.6%, the highest in Africa.
Okay.
And this is very positive.
Yes.
We have the inflation rate that was predicted actually to go through, the roof. But now we have an inflation rate that's lower than last year around this time, at 4.3, when last year was at 5%.
Okay.
And we are also lucky because God has also given us sufficient rain. We have enough food. And as a result of this, not only the supply of food at a cheaper rate, but also the adverse effect on the manufacturing sector has been mitigated because most of our manufacturing sector is in the agro-processing. I think those are things but importantly, we do not want to stop there. We are looking to the future and we have come up with a recovery process that's going to take us for the number of years. And we are going to look at the micro stability. We are going to look at, resource mobilization, not from loans, but, within by ensuring that the PPP works as expected. And those are and also entrenching the place of ICT, because we've realized that indeed this can be a turnaround of the economy by investing in that area. So those are things that we are looking at.
All right. I would like to pose the third question that the President asked. Were we sufficiently responsive to the unknown twists of this pandemic? And in looking at it from an industrialization perspective, CS Betty Minor, I would like to pose this question to you. Do you think that we were sufficiently responsive to the unknown twists of this pandemic, looking at it from that perspective? CS Betty Minor, the CS for Industrialization, Trade and Enterprise Development.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think that's the. Thank you very much for that question, and thank you very much, Your Excellency, for putting this conference together. From where I sit, I think we can answer that in a very strong affirmative. There is a Kenyan often saying, I think your car breaks down on the side of the road in a small village, and somebody shows up, those cars that you could fix, and you explain, and they tell you, inawezekana. And it's a guy who just came out from nowhere. But I think that can-do attitude of Kenya is what has saved us during this period. The response, for instance, to production of medical commodities, CS Kagwe just mentioned it at one NARC meeting and said, we're running short of ventilators. Can these people make it? In the presser, immediately after that, we challenged the motor sector to come up with ventilators. In 2 weeks, flat, we had a prototype we were reviewing in our office. And right now, we have 2 which have been calibrated and are out for clinical tests. It's been done in less than 6 months. These guys had never done ventilators before, but now it's actually something that could go into the market before the end of the year. We've talked about face masks and stuff like that. People have actually produced, we are exporting. In the beginning, we shut down, because of social distancing. A lot of workers went home, but in no time, people had spread themselves out. We had shut down because of exports to Europe, because there was a collapse in the market there. The statistics that have just been released today by the Export Promotion Council shows that in the last 5 months, we have exported, the last 9 months, we have exported more than we did last year. And it is because Kenyans rallied, bore these restrictions, but they were very, very determined to work. So in that sense, I think our response wasn't really surprising because I think it is innate in Kenyans to respond to these to situations. We've got a very, very positive attitude, and we have taken this opportunity to construct ourselves. The way the government in Kenya responded, we talk about lockdown, but when you read about what other countries have done, we actually haven't had the lockdowns. We have had restrictions, but people have managed to work within those restrictions. We've had guidelines, and people have observed that guidelines. Thankfully, as Dr. Ambacho says, by observing the guidelines, you're not as sick anymore, but you're productive. And I think that for me is, answering that question, is that we have really taken this opportunity. The second thing we've used this opportunity is to rebuild back our confidence in our own industries. We've been talking Buy Kenya, Build Kenya, but we haven't taken all the necessary steps to actually do that. Thank you, Jane, for the committee for buying from Kenya. We have gazetted a list of products that can be procured from within by government. And therefore, it is the challenge to Kenyan industrialists to ensure that this faith is not misplaced. There are many people who import medical goods. They showed up, they went to the press and said, these things are not, they don't meet standards. But the doctors themselves will tell you that the locally produced PPEs, they feel more confident in them. So we need to start believing in ourselves and rising up to this challenge, and we can confirm we can live with restrictions, but we can still be productive within them and discover new ways of working. You can have a meeting without drinking tea, but you'll still have the meeting from wherever you are. So we can be very creative.
Okay, there are some people who say, or some experts, economic experts, who say that Kenya has relied more on import distribution and less on export production. Would you say that these are some of the lessons we are taking going forward, that Kenya does actually have the potential? It's just that it's taken us a crisis like the COVID pandemic for us to realize this potential that lies within the country?
No, I think to correct you, Kenya, I think the policy of import substitution died a long time ago. I think we recognized that we needed to have an open economy. So the question is, we've actually been building up on our exports, and that's been part and parcel. And the reason we have trade agreements and all these reach outs is to expand our exports. But there are critical commodities that we hadn't developed the capacity to do. And I think the whole world, it's not just us who've woken up. The disruption of global supply chains has made people realize that you need to have some critical supplies when you need them, and therefore you need some critical capacity for it. And that's what we will continue to do. But we are only about 50 million people. We cannot just produce for ourselves. So we must have the capacity to produce for the rest of the world. And as we now work on implementing our export strategy, it's critical to look at the goods that other parts of the world import from others and confirm if we have the capacity to produce. And my confirmation and the confirmation we've had for ourselves in these last 6 months is that we have that capacity, and we need to merge the energy of the private sector and the policies of government so that we can produce better.
Okay. Governor Anyang' Nyong'o, I would like to pose this question to you from the county's perspective. What have the counties been doing to support local economies? Because at the start of the pandemic and when the directives came into place, there was cessation of movement, and by so, most of the businesses that operate inter-county were affected. How have you been able to stimulate local economies at the county level and at the same time, still boost growth amid a pandemic?
Thank you very much. I think that's a very, very appropriate question. Counties have not only been stimulating local industries, manufacturers during the pandemic, but even before. We have been investing in labor-intensive programs in the counties. I'll give you an example, such as in Kisumu, we have what we call Kisumu county roads maintenance teams, which we use to maintain roads and build access roads, very much in the way that the Public Works Department did in Kenya some time ago. And we buy machinery from the local market, simple and complicated machinery, from wheelbarrows, slashes, tractors, so that these young people trained at the KBC Roads College, can get employment, but also contribute to the building of the local economy. If you take the county of Busia, for example, in a program that is supported by one of the donors, Busia County has been able to establish a cage fishing enterprise in which there is partnership between the local young people, the women, business communities, and capital from diaspora. The government of Busia has come up with a very good formula whereby one person does not own more than 10 cages, however much capital you have, and the young people who are working in the fish cages can not only get employment, but some money is also saved so that make sure that their families can send the kids to school. I think it's an example worth following in the other enterprises in other counties. And I'm quite sure that when we're going to be launching our economic recovery strategy for the county, we shall have time for sharing lessons, see how counties can still go ahead and stimulate domestic industrialization while also getting employment for our people. Second thing is to build institutions that can be able to stimulate local entrepreneurship. Again, I'll use my county, in Kisumu County, for example. We're just finishing the building of a business innovation and incubation center, where we hope that, again, young entrepreneurs can get the opportunity. When other overheads are paid for by the county government, develop their entrepreneurship. And finally, let me say the following. As Betty has pointed out, I personally think, and this is my view as a scholar as well as a policymaker, that the policy of import substitution, industrialization, was thrown through the window prematurely, mainly because of the pressure from the Washington consensus. And I don't think that given the kind of things that we need in the domestic economy, let me give you an example, sufurias.
Yeah.
How many people use sufurias in Kenya? Millions. We need to import sufuria from anywhere. We can make our own sufurias and use them. And from making sufurias, we can learn to make other things. And therefore, import substitution, industrialization, COVID time, was proved to have been given up prematurely. Governor Kuti just gave you examples of the sanitizers and the sweets and so on. Many more examples can be given. So I really think that even in counties, we have seen and we have learned that in many ways we need to produce certain things locally, especially when there's a shutdown and the airlines are not coming, buses are not coming, then you must be self-reliant on certain things.
Great.
Finally, in the area of agriculture, Madam, I think the smallholder production, the smallholder family, is still the heartbeat of this nation. During the pandemic, we learned that without food, you can't go anywhere. Our smallholder producers, so-called farmers in the rural areas, depend too much on the market for things they can produce at home. When I was growing up, for example, the only thing we bought in the market were three things: Ibritis, sabunis, and salt. All the other food was available in my mother's compound. Beyond the kitchen was a little garden where all the vegetables were available.
Right.
In the courtyard was the cattle shed where the cattle produced milk and we could use it for both ghee and milk. Next door were the chicken, producing eggs and themselves for eating. So we find that within the household economy, there's a lot of self-sufficiency. We must learn in the post-COVID situation, in counties in particular, support this household economy
by providing seeds, by teaching the farmers how to use their soil scientifically, because certain seeds cannot grow in certain soils. In other words, we should reintroduce what I call extension service, which apparently has been relaxed. This really is the nerve center of stimulating the household economy. Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot, Governor. Archbishop Anthony, I would like to come to you as well to pose this question to you. Archbishop Muheria, who is the chairperson, Interfaith Council on COVID-19. Some people last went to church, literally, when the directives were announced. And they've had to find other means to, seek spiritual nourishment. And this includes Zoom prayers and also, going online to figure out how exactly, and just praying in their homes. But what would you make out of it? Because for now, it's been several months later. Do you think the congregation, the populations are still close to God or to the spiritual higher power?
Thank you very much. First, let me thank the invitation to be on this panel, because I seem to be the only one who doesn't have $1 written on me or a Kenya shilling. But fundamentally, on behalf of all religious leaders and the religious faith community, because it's a recognition of the power of hope, because the faith communities are actually in the business of hope, and the power of hope in transformation, the power of hope driving through crisis, the power of hope to actually turn minds and even bring about all that what my colleagues on the panel have been presenting. This, at the beginning, was not so obvious. We perhaps focused very much on the health, protection, and other areas which are more directly medical or just economical. And we perhaps forgot that most intimate and perhaps more compelling part of the person, that is the spiritual and the psyche. And this is where perhaps the closing of the places of worship to public brought a big shake-up for an average Kenyan, because that is where you find solace, that is where you find hope, that is where you even find yourself, because this thing that comes upon you totally disorients you. And at the beginning, I think we missed it a little bit, but very soon, and as was directed with the formation of the Interfaith Council by His Excellency the President, and that has walked and steered the people towards a different kind of worship. It is a connectedness that bridges the social distance, that bridges the physical distance, and bridges the spiritual distance. And that has come through technology. Of course, most of us didn't know Zoom before COVID, and we discovered it. And from having a congregation of 300, you end up having a congregation of 3,000. From reaching out maybe before to only 100 hearts, you suddenly find yourself reaching out to the whole world. And this, I think, is a fantastic achievement, because that will not end now. It is about finding out how we can scale up this kind of connectedness. At the same time, I think that people have been a little more attentive, because the vulnerability of the human person has been exposed. Irrespective of your level of social status, irrespective of your financial status, and even technological advancement, we find ourselves all at equal ground when COVID came in. And so suddenly we find it is not enough to have an insurance of health or insurance of wealth. And suddenly God comes into the center of all this. And since our nation is very God-fearing and God-loving, I think this is also a wake-up call that all that we are doing in development must have God very much in the center. And that's why we thank even the religious leaders who have played a tremendous role in complementing government efforts, in reaching out to compliance, reaching out to follow up the guidelines we've received, and even to give hope. And I think if there is anything that COVID has been very strong on any sector, it is to awaken the power of hope. And that power of hope comes from a deep-seated faith.
Right.
So to answer the question you asked, yes, people are still perhaps at home, the elderly especially, but their faith, I think, is undented. They have discovered new ways, the ways of the radio for the upcountry and rural community, the ways of the TV for those who've got that access. But I also think even the ways of family worship and being together before God and feeling a new calling to play a very important point and role of solidarity in our nation. So yes, it has been a lesson, but I think it's a lesson that has made us grow and has made us even more godly, I believe.
Are we going to see more Zoom prayers and less people going to places of worship?
No, I think we'll see more people going to places of worship and more people participating in Zoom forms of worship. It will be not now going back. I do believe we're going to go forward. Right. In our going to all the counties with the Interfaith Council, which has done great, I think that is what we've received, an overwhelming response that people are hungry to be connected, but at the same time recognizing that times are changing. And we are learning. Many religious leaders who didn't have any IT exposure suddenly have become IT experts with their iPads, with their Zoom cameras. And I think that is now a new space of reaching the God's care to the people. And beyond just the fact of religion, I think it is a point of hope, challenge, and that God cares for us, but we must now do more, even moved by the fact that God has protected us.
Great. I would now like to come to Jaswinder Bedi, who is the proprietor for Bedi Investments. Before the pandemic, you were not manufacturing masks or PPEs, and then came the pandemic and you had to reinvent, and now you are churning out possibly the highest number of PPEs in the country today. What informed this, and what lessons, what business lessons have you drawn out of this pandemic period?
Thank you very much. I think I must thank His Excellency the President. He called me early March, I still remember, and those words still come back to me repeatedly. And he said to me, Bedi, we need an in-country local solution. We don't have enough PPEs in Kenya. And I said, Your Excellency, we don't make PPEs, but let me think about it and let me see what I can do. And within no time, in 10 days, literally, I had a prototype ready. I went to the minister's office, Minister Betty was sitting here with me, and I said, Minister, I have developed this prototype PPE, and I would like us to take it forward. In less than 2 minutes, she called Minister Kagwe, and she arranged my meeting in literally 2 hours. I was in Ministry of Health, and Minister Kagwe called his entire team, all the doctors, everybody you could think of into a meeting, and said, guys, we have a local solution. And of course, from there on, the testing went on and things went on. And it was, for me, a learning experience that had it not been the challenge that Your Excellency you gave me personally, this wouldn't have happened. It actually encouraged many other factories, not only my own company. It encouraged more than 100 factories today who are doing this. And yes, we had to reform ourselves. It was a question of repurposing. It was a question of retooling, reinventing, re-engineering, refocus. So my biggest buzzword today is re. What else can we redo? I mean, what should we reinvent, or how can we be resilient, and the recovery, the redesign, the reimagine. So that's what this has taught Kenyans. And you know what? I was reading something the other day from Dr. Zeus, and he said when bad things happen, you have 3 choices. 1, you can either let it define you. 2, you can let it destroy you. 3, you can let it strengthen you. One thing I can say with any fear or contradiction is, as Kenyans, we chose, let it strengthen us. And as Kenyans, we are much stronger today than we were pre-COVID.
All right. We are much stronger, and there's more resilience, and that, I guess, is the spirit of what we've been seeing since the pandemic broke out. People have been doing unconventional things, but still being able to stimulate growth in the economy. Ambassador Yatani, I would like to come back to you. In terms of policies going forward, many Kenyans, if not all Kenyans, are expecting that growth will be facilitated through the different interventions, like the ones we have seen during the pandemic. They have been reliefs, both fiscal and monetary interventions, and a lot of people are now saying, is this going to go forward? And if not, what are some of the policies that will need to be reviewed to be able to stimulate the next fiscal year, for instance?
Yeah, thank you very much once again. And it's really important to realize that every problem provides opportunity as well as new coping mechanism. As a country, as an economy, we are still determined to rationalize government expenditure, but promote to a great extent private investment. And to this we are now trying to support, by all means, particularly the micro, small, and medium enterprises, by coming up with a credit guarantee scheme, where the national government has already provided a seed capital of 10 billion, and as a result of engagement with the banks and other institutions, we already prepared the framework and will be rolling the next few weeks. This now will provide access to the SMEs, where they'll be engaging in the various fields, create jobs, create markets, create opportunities. Additionally, we'll also continue to invest on the Agenda 4 projects, because they are the life, the blood of this country. When you look at housing, when you look at jobs through manufacturing, when you look at the universal health coverage, when you look at food security, these are basic human requirements. We are going to invest heavily to ensure that they continue providing jobs and opportunities for the rest of Kenya. We are also looking at policy reforms in the tax areas by seeing that, so that our policies and taxes will be more facilitative for a good business environment rather than punitive, or rather than just as a basis of collecting revenue. And to this extent, we are now reviewing part of taxes, like the turnover tax. You remember at the onset of this challenge, we are reduced from 3% to 1%. And we want to continue sustaining that, because that's where most Kenyans are, and we want to be more facilitated. We also want to streamline tax administration by making sure that people who are supposed to pay, they pay without options, and ensuring that there are no leakages. But to a great extent, we also want to grow the base. Rather than just tax a few people, we want to grow the base by ensuring that most Kenyans who are within the tax bracket pay, because you cannot survive without those taxes. We cannot survive without revenue. We want better and enhanced service delivery. We want to achieve more development. Because I think I also need to mention this. At the time when we were hit by this challenge, we were actually at a turning point where we said we were going to work on a fiscal consolidation process by making sure that, we reduce our appetite for loans, particularly commercial loans, completely getting rid of commercial loans. And you have to borrow. We borrow sustainably. We borrow from the concessional window. But the magic about it is that you can only substitute with your own revenue, casting the net wider and have, without necessarily compromising on growth. These are what we are looking at. And I want to say with satisfaction that today, the last 1 year, we have not borrowed commercially. Kenya has never defaulted on any loan. And by any index, we are among the most favorable, because if you look at, sometimes for you to achieve faster development, for you to achieve more development within a very short time, and also as a stimulator, like the infrastructure projects, they enhance trade, investment, and opportunities by creating more jobs. But how do we now achieve all this within a very short time? And the kind of resources available to us are not adequate. And all countries, all developed countries, have a basis of borrowing. Look at Japan. To the extent of 238% of the GDP, that's what their loan status is. And we are at 57. And many countries, and the US is about 110. So the countries that we depend on for support, they are also developed as a result of borrowing. So we are looking at many other measures by also rationalizing government expenses. There are certain expenses that does not add a lot of value.
Right.
If you look at foreign travels, The past we've been traveling, uncoordinated and in whatever numbers. All this is now outflows of our foreign reserves to go and do investment and create jobs elsewhere. Instead, now we are, through the stimulus package, we have looked at those critical sectors of growth on tourism by supporting them to be up and about, enabling support in the areas of renovation by supporting the conservancies, looking at employment within our own support, the teaching sector, and all these. So those are the policies that we are looking at. As much as I said, but we want to concentrate more on mobilizing resources locally by strengthening and enshrining, the public-private partnership as a core of our business and resource mobilization for realization of faster growth.
All right. You talked about resource mobilization locally, and a good number of experts, again, are worried about Kenya's public debt. We're looking at an economy that has seen an increased number of unemployed citizens. And so when you look at these two situations, at the end of the day, what Kenyans want is money in their pockets, or where it's going to come from, at least. And because the government's role is to provide an enabling environment for the private sector to be able to create jobs, how do you think this is going to work out going forward?
I think you've correctly indicated that, the role of government is to be a catalyst in the economic activity, the various economic activities, through relevant, timely, and appropriate policies, by also creating certain incentives on a number of areas. And I think we also cover quite details on the tax regime. We are now looking at, whether our taxes addresses all these concerns. To a great extent, yes. But the areas also that requires reform. And those are areas that we are looking at. We want to closely work with the private sector, and we have already done it. In the preparation of the stimulus package, also the first incentive, as well as also the recovery process, the private sector is on board, and we know together we now look at those indices that if investment is done properly, is going to enhance the outcome of the desired process. But we are not also now on. We operate within a region of the Southern community. We also have to be alive to the policies and directions of the community.
Right.
Because we have that reciprocity in terms of what we need to do here, that has a direct bearing on the region. We do not want to really outcompete ourselves out of the market. We have to remain competitive. But the journey ahead is quite, in my view, from where I sit, I'm very optimistic. Because we've managed to withstand the shock. At the same time, our policies are working. If we want the spread of now the Kazi Mutani and all those investments that's taking place, we now realize faster development while also maintaining the market alive and ensuring that coordination and the stimulus at all levels are realized. The policies that we are going to put in place now will enable us to realize faster development, create more jobs for our people by creating that required business environment for private sector to thrive.
All right. CS Minor, I would like to come to you. In terms of the different job creation policies in this case, I would say that Ambassador Yatani has talked about, we are also looking at the opportunities that are meant to come out of this economy that the entire Eastern Africa region looks up to. Talk to us about the opportunities going forward for that small Kenyan business person that would like to thrive in the economy, for the medium-sized businesses, for also the large-scale businesses. They're all looking for opportunities, both locally and outside of the country. Where are these opportunities, and where do you think some of the challenges could be for the business people in the country?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think the opportunities are in every sector. I think there's lots that has opened up for us locally, and the fact that we know we can produce these things that we currently import means that there's a great opportunity in the domestic market in meeting, because the imported things are still very expensive. I mean, even just getting them here. The fact that if we can produce them here, we'll be able to meet that demand. Now, there are very many different sectors within the economy. So clearly, that's I think that's the answer. But the second answer is that there's also a great opportunity in the external market. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area, for instance, we've done an analysis, and it shows that even with just basic foods, processed foods, there's a lot of opportunity because that is currently imported into the continent. So for our agro-processors, these beans that you pack and only send to Europe, you can actually pack and send to Cote d'Ivoire, you can pack and send to Congo. The fish that we have here, with the chicken, for instance, people will tell you in Congo, they can't get good chicken. And here you are, we say we don't have a market for it. So there's a great opportunity for agro-processed products within the continent. There's also a great opportunity outside. The trade negotiations that we undertake, whether within East African community or with our partners in Europe or with the US, are always informed by an objective of expanding our markets. And what that does is that it also expands opportunities for investment. Mm-hmm. There are people who come to Kenya to invest here because of the promised market in Europe or in America. Therefore, for us as Kenyans, if people see that opportunity and bring their capital from China here, it's also important for us. I mean, we put it in real estate, but we should also put it in manufacturing. So my answer to you is that the opportunities for Kenyan business are both here and in the markets that the government has negotiated with. And it's an opportunities that helps us to attract partners that can work with us here. I had the bell, so I guess I better stop there.
Yeah, all right. Governor Anyang' Nyong'o, I'd like to come back to you. You talked about the different initiatives in Kisumu County, but one of the challenges that Kenyans, business owners experience today in the counties is the fact that they are not streamlined business regulatory frameworks to allow them to operate freely. And so this in itself is a challenge. How do we, going forward, make sure that these are streamlined to allow for better business conducted at the devolution level?
I think that is a work in progress, really. And I think together with the Ministry of Industry and other government departments, the Council of Governors is working very closely to make sure that rules, regulations, and procedures are streamlined. Mm-hmm. I'll give an example, the area of taxation. I think there's been a lot in the press about businessmen experiencing taxation across borders in counties. You have to have a license for this and the other. But I think this is a national problem, really. If you take, for example, the cost of production of any item in any industry, very much affected by energy. If you look at the bill you pay to Kenya Power and Lighting Company, those of us who use these tokens, you'll find that 30% of what you pay is taxes. Mm-hmm. And this is prohibitive. Now, the counties too would like to raise certain domestic revenue to finance their development. Many counties have established youth enterprise funds, women enterprise funds, and so on, so that to support local entrepreneurship. Now, I think it would be good if we had a meeting like this with the national government to rationalize some of these taxes and ways in which we can stimulate domestic production and entrepreneurship. And so I think that that concern is genuine. It's a concern the Council of Governors has also taken very seriously. Mm-hmm. Recently, when we undertook this study of economic recovery in counties, I was amazed at the various projects and initiatives counties are taking to stimulate domestic industry. Data is not there that we knew, but this study has revealed us a lot of information and data. That means really that both at the county level and national government, we should invest heavily in research and in universities to give us information on what we are doing and what we ought to do. I think in the area of health, for example, you found that when the Ministry of Health wanted to know whether we could produce a local vaccine,
they approached the right institution, Kenya Medical Research Institute.
Right.
And that approach itself showed you that the Ministry of Health did not know or was not quite aware what the KMD was doing in terms of doing research in such vaccines. And you remember a debate ensued whether the ministry had invested enough in KEMRI and so on. But this is a reality in our country. I think the reliance on data for policy making is important. And COVID showed us that good data leads to good policy. And therefore, at the county and national level, we are really not going to do much if we don't have good regulations to stimulate research, get good data to make public policy. Lastly, let me say the following. I think we're a country of great potential, really. And this COVID-19 experience has shown that this potential is not fully exploited. I think in our countries, we have a great potential of having poles of industrialization. Remember, Thailand had this program, one product, one village. I think we can begin by having a policy, one industry, one county.
Yes.
So capitalize on the potential of counties. I'll give you a last example. For example, Baringo can produce a lot of honey. West Pokot too. Now, how are we capitalizing on that production of honey in these two counties? Secondly, in lots of counties in Central Province, avocado is now a going concern. Everybody is trying to produce avocado. And there's a lot of demand for avocado in the global market. Now, to what extent can avocado be produced in other counties? And what type of avocado? Have we done the soil chemistry in our counties to see what kind of agriculture can best give the highest results in agricultural production in these counties? Now, that means that our previous investment in research institution in the area of agriculture, to what extent have we kept on putting money in that research to tell us what our potential is and where we can invest in agriculture for the highest productivity? I think this is what we learned from this COVID experience, that we have left a lot of our potential lying below the radar and not exploiting them properly. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. I would like to come to just before I can give the last word to our Archbishop. What more support do you think the government can give to businesses across the country to allow them to thrive?
Thank you. I think the government, like the minister said, were very quick in the way they reacted and very quick in the way they implemented policy. They brought the VAT down, they brought the income tax down. And one thing I must commend His Excellency, the President, is that the cash deposit ratio with all banks was 5.25%, and he moved it down to 4.25%, releasing 37 billion shillings for Wanjiku. Unfortunately, that money didn't make it to Wanjiku. That's another subject. But the truth of the matter is, government did a lot. Did private sector reciprocate? Yes, they did. Could we have done better? Yes, we could. What did we do wrong? Few things that I think funding is a single biggest challenge to most industry and most micro enterprises in Kenya today. And that funding, we must unlock funding.
Great.
If you saw the rest of the world, you saw Europe, US, they were throwing money at the problem. We were taking money off the table.
Okay.
Big paradigm shift needs to happen. And if we can fund Kenyan industry and Kenyan entrepreneurs, Kenya is going to fly high. I can guarantee you that.
A paradigm shift. Our Archbishop Anthony Muheria would like to give you the last word. Kenyans are, to an extent, depressed, understandably, because there's been loss of lives, there's been, teen pregnancies, gender-based violence, and all these things happening in our societies. But then the future is bright, we hope, and would like for you to speak to all Kenyans out there who are watching you and listening to you right now. What is your message to them?
Thank you very much. First and foremost, I think COVID has revealed the issue, as I said, of vulnerability and the need for us as humans to wrestle and to know how to accommodate and manage vulnerability, be it economic, be it health, and be it spiritual. And also here too, be it also in the area of mental health. We have seen that it has revealed the underbelly of family health. In other words, that our families are having bad health. We've had so many incidents of domestic violence. But I think this is going to challenge us going forward, that we must have a kind of a programmatic attention to the human person, not only about the well-being in terms of economic, but above all, the spiritual, psyche, and the environment that will manage them to reach that peaceful, harmonious living and also achieve their goals. We are in the mission of hope. And I think this is what would like, if you allow me to conclude all what we have discussed, is that COVID has taught us, if we keep a firm grasp of hope throughout, irrespective of the challenge and the threat, that hope would drive us humanly to do much greater than even what we had thought before. The second, that hope is not a line that is not connected. That hope is a connection to God. When we started the COVID struggle or the fight, our president, His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, invited us to pray to a national prayer day. That was a first sign across the globe of a country that thought that was very, very important. I think we as a country must not lose that perspective. And the hope is connected to God. And finally, that even the challenges, including the challenges, need skills. It is not enough to have goodwill. It is not enough to want or to hope things will change. We need to up the skills of mental health attention, the skills of business too, because I think we have to sharpen our business. But we also need the skill to learn how to meet crisis with strategy and challenge, as we have learned. So to all who are listening, and especially to our leadership here, I think they have given us a good lesson, the lesson to trust God, but also a lesson to keep our eyes on the ball. And that ball is a hope of the Kenyan people. And I think our hope is really up there, that we are emerging even more powerful than we entered this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all my panelists, Ambassador Ukuri Atani, the CS National Treasury and Planning, CS Betty Maina, who is Cabinet Secretary, Ministry of Industrialization, Trade and Development, Governor Anyang' Nyong'o of Kisumu County, Archbishop Anthony Muheria, the Chairperson, Interfaith Council on COVID-19, and Jaswinder Bedi, who is a proprietor, Bedi Investments. Thank you all so much. And I would now like to invite Peter Wanjohi to come over. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
The National Hygiene Program, also known as KBC Online, is a national initiative designed to cushion the most vulnerable citizens living in informal settlements from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. KBC Online kicked off in April 2020 on select informal settlements in Nairobi and 7 other counties. The program employed over 26,000 workers in the informal settlement.
As a government, we have started to harness the energy of our young people, engaging them in the National Hygiene Program that is more commonly now being referred to as KBC Mtaani Initiative.
We started a project to not only rehabilitate, but to ensure that they earn a living. So whatever the youths here are earning are the street family earning in Grogan Road. That is one of the success stories we have engaged on. And that is almost killing 3 birds with 1 stone. One, we have given them employment to rent their own shelter. Most of them are now not living in streets. Thirdly, we are trying to change their mindset by having 1-hour lessons conducted by National Youth Service on how to rehabilitate them to return to normal life.
Tunachapa kazi, by the time unaenda home, umechoka, unashawa na relax.
Maneno ya usalama imeimarika.
Inaambia hadi president wetu asante sana.
hatuchelewi, tunapewa. Hii kazi ina maneno na town ndio ile inaelekea kung'ara.
I think it's important we applaud all the panelists and all the moderators for a job well done. And with your permission, Your Excellency, I will now invite Cabinet Secretary Dr. Fred Matiang'i to guide the program. I will most humbly request that we strictly follow the timelines that we agreed. Kindly, Waziri Karibu.
President of the Republic of Kenya and Commander-in-Chief of the Kenya Defense Forces, distinguished participants, this is the last of our sessions today. I pray probably the shortest, because we are looking forward to your address to the nation, Your Excellency. And with the utmost humility and tremendous respect, may I request the following honorable gentlemen to come up front. The Honorable Senator Kenneth Lusaka, the Speaker of the Senate, the Honorable Justin Muturi, the Speaker of the National Assembly, the Honorable, the Chief Justice of the Republic of Kenya and President of the Supreme Court, Mr. Justice David Maraga, the Honorable Musalia Mudavadi, Honorable Wycliffe Oparanya, the Chair of the Council of Governors, and finally, the Right Honorable Prime Minister Raila Odinga. During this session, Your Excellency, we will give the leaders of the other arms of government who are here and the critical role players in this process an opportunity to each make very short, reflective remarks or responses to what has happened today and what the experiences have been in the war against COVID, because as leaders, we believe they too have a perspective on what has been going on and how we will move to the next level. I would like, therefore, to request, I have been asked by the moderators just to spend about 10 minutes, which means about 2 minutes or so one of them. I would like to request the Honorable Musalia Mudavadi to start us off.
Thank you, Honorable Matiang'i. Your Excellency, the President, pongezi for gathering us here today so that we can reflect on the state of the nation and also be able to think together on the way forward. Kwa hivyo nasema asante sana. Your Excellency, very important messages have come from the panelists, and I'll just try and summarize one or two things that perhaps may need further reflection in terms of policy development. One is the functions as defined of the national government and the county government. I think the COVID scenario, as bad as it has been to the Kenyan people, has shown that perhaps the fear that we sometimes have that certain functions should not be devolved can be overcome through concerted effort. This is a very good example that we can move forward with. The other thing that I think we must look at is to continuously define the fault lines. In all this conversation, perhaps we needed a very specific approach to what are the fault lines, because it is clear that COVID is not over. So let me be a little bit self-provocative here. Who are the fault lines? Is it the politicians?
Are we the fault line in the fight against COVID? Is it some of our institutions? Be it the parliament, be it the county assemblies? Are these the fault lines? Who has been at the forefront in breaching the rules in the fight against COVID? Is it us? Me being one of them? And if so, then what can we do so that we as the fault lines can be curbed so that Kenyan lives can be saved? Finally, I would just like to urge the Treasury to continuously review the tax regime so that it can be more friendly to the business community, because we have seen so many institutions go under. The pressure is immense. Some are investors in this room, some are businessmen. Your Excellency, I can tell you, KRA is breathing down the necks of many people. One enters through this door, when you think you are done, the next officer enters through the other door. I think a continuous reflection around the tax regime to make it more business friendly for rapid revival will be very important. And finally, just to urge the Treasury Secretary to look at the debt numbers carefully. He gave us a fairly confident situation, but I think we all know we need to be very, very careful so that we can resuscitate our economy as soon as possible. Apart from that, Your Excellency, it has not been easy for you. Some of us have had very minimal contact with you. We had to keep away. Your life is a matter of national security. So it is understood that for us to hover around you and give you COVID could have been very dangerous for this country. So we thank God that you are here. Asanteni sana.
Thank you very much. I think as a person, I had a chance to make a few comments, and now I have a short statement that I want to give on behalf of the Council of Governors as Chair. Your Excellency, on behalf of the county governments, I take this opportunity to express our gratitude for inviting us to participate in this conference. We appreciate your continued leadership over the last 6 months. The protocols and guidelines developed since the first case was confirmed in the country have been useful in enabling the counties to confront the virus and reduce the infection rate. Kenyans' efforts, as you are aware, has been recognized globally, and we congratulate you for your leadership. Today's conference is integral in the Kenya's COVID-19 journey. As we have heard from most speakers who are here during the panel discussions, has enabled the participants to reflect on the measures that both levels of government put in place to combat the pandemic. The speakers also reflected on the efficacy of the intervention, their effectiveness, and made proposals for socio-economic structures and systems need to anchor resilience and sustainability for future infections. Over the last 6 months, county governments in tackling the prevention, control, and management of the pandemic have learned a number of lessons from what worked and what did not work, and the challenges that still confront us. One key lesson, as I had said before, is that it is time, in times of crisis, we have no choice but to stick together. The pandemic brought the two levels of government closer, and this should be the way to relate always. We cannot wish away disagreements, but this does not mean we cannot sit together and agree to disagree, but still talk and find ways to serve the Kenyan people. The various national and county government coordinating committees were a good platform of engagement. We need to see more of this. As at the onset, during the disease, the county government had various gaps in key areas. For example, they had as little or no local capacity to produce PPEs. But today, there are counties who are undertaking local production of PPEs with the policy of Buy Kenya, Build Kenya. In March 2020, county governments had 56,328 health workers. Now they have 66,935, an increase of about 10,000. In March, county government in total had 162 ICU beds. Now they have 492. In March, our capacity to respond to emergencies had not been tested, but we now know that we can build in a record 19 days a facility to host 35 beds, fully equipped, as it happened in Murang'a. Your Excellency, the Council of Governors is documenting the county government story and journey about COVID-19, a publication that will be a must read for purposes of handling any future crisis. And thank you very much, Your Excellency, for giving us your forward for that document. The COVID pandemic crisis was in many ways a shock, which after a period of astonishment has caused an awakening to the inadequacies in the Kenyan society, but also to the opportunities available that you have not been paying attention to. Your Excellency, in conclusion, let me pose some questions that I believe we should continue to reflect on even after listening to the various speakers, especially after post-COVID period. The first question, what is the new post-COVID normality we are moving towards? The second question, what are the pitfalls that we should be aware of? I thank you very much. That's a statement from the Council of Governors.
The Honorable Speaker of the Senate.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, the President and Commander-in-Chief of our Defense Forces, all protocols observed. On behalf of Senate, I also want to report that immediately we were confronted with this problem. We did form an ad hoc committee of 7 members who successfully worked on a bill, what we call the Pandemic Response and Management Bill, to give it such pandemics a legal framework in future, because I'm sure this is not going to be the last one. It was passed on 30th of June 2020 and forwarded to my brother, Speaker Muturi, in the National Assembly. I'm sure once they conclude and you are sent to it, That will give us a legal framework on how we should handle future challenges like the one we faced. And the committee also did make some recommendations, and some of them are the Act for the operationalization of the Micro and Small Enterprise Fund, which can assist those affected at such times. Then also government-backed credit guarantee schemes so that banks can be able to avail liquidity, especially to small-scale business people who are seriously affected. And of course, as Senate, we also did raise the red flag to the county governments whom we oversight that, it's during such times that a lot of rules are broken, especially in procurement. And that we really urge the county governments to ensure that they follow the law, because oversight will still continue even with or without COVID-19. So we'll continue, on behalf of Senate, we'll continue giving the necessary support to the executive and other arms of government whenever we are faced with such challenges. And I also want to loud on behalf of the Senate, Your Excellency the President, the ministers, and all who are involved in this, who are involved in sorting out the challenges that we are facing, and reassure you that we'll continue giving the necessary support. Thank you, Your Excellency.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Just to appreciate the statements that have come from the various speakers who have spoken to us this afternoon, and to state that at the National Assembly level, and indeed as Parliament, we remain very focused about what policies we need to put in place. Of course, the various measures that CS Yatani has talked about, and the Honorable Mutai Kagwe, they will not have run the force of law if we did not remain engaged. And we therefore would want to assure that going forward, all that may come from the executive with regard to policies necessary to address the post-COVID-19 period will find us ready to engage with the, because it is not rocket science to really appreciate that, yes, as has been said by Archbishop Muheria, hope is extremely important at this time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Waziri, Your Excellency, President, and fellow leaders here. Devastating as it has been, COVID has made us learn some lessons, quite a number of them. You will recall that when we had a few cases in the country, the Judiciary was one of the institutions which immediately scaled down its operations. This is simply because of the crowds that cases attracted court, and where we could not keep distancing. With that, we have come up with quite a number of innovations to be able to continue rendering services to wananchi. And what has come handy is the use of technology. The use of technology, as some other speakers have said, some of the applications we had not even thought of came handy. But I want to point out that there are still a few challenges we need to address as a nation. We are scheduled to have a conference of the National Council on Administration of Justice and review quite a number of things that we need to put in place so that we continue serving, because we don't know how long this pandemic is going to last. One of the challenges that we have faced is internet connectivity, quite a number of our courts in the country. Other than in the major towns, connectivity is quite a challenge. And yet, we have got to reach those people. So we want to meet. When we meet, we will make recommendations to Ministry of ICT on if there's something that can be done so that we are able to continue serving wananchi. I want to say that with this onset, of course it was in our plans, but it accelerated the process. We started e-filing because it was dangerous to have documents being filed physically and delivered to our courts. With that, we started e-filing. It had challenges initially with connectivity, but it has worked very well, and we are very, very happy with the progress that has been made. I want to report that in the Nairobi and the environs, we are now able to file cases electronically, and the judges and judicial officers are able to handle cases and proceed. And in shortly, we will be moving to other parts of the country. So I want to say that the lessons that we have learned, let us utilize that. Let us up our act. For instance, I learned that even the prisoners are very, very happy to have their cases heard while they are seated in prison. So we just need some very, very minor investment in that area to make it possible for the prisoners to connect to courts so that they don't have to be transported to court. And that will be a huge saving. So for me, what I want to say is that we have done fairly well in the circumstances, but I think we can still do better. If we can put our act together, all of us, we are going to be able to overcome this problem. And even after that, let us not lose the lessons we have learned. We have very few, for example, document examiners in the country who are required all over the country, all over the country. With this, the lessons we have learned from the COVID pandemic, we are not going to require those people to travel to courts. We are going to connect with them and have them testify from their offices. The same as the pathologists, the same as the ballistic experts and others. And I think those lessons learned, if we can utilize them, we will go a long way. I want to thank the Kenyans for the cooperation we have had, and let us continue, and we will succeed and get this over. Thank you very much.
I just want to begin first by saying that when this pandemic first broke out in China, then started traveling to Europe and the Americas, it was generally believed internationally that by this time it lands in Africa, there will be a disaster. That it will eventually end up like an African epidemic, like malaria, bilharzia, HIV/AIDS, and so on. But that has not come to pass. And I think as Africans we must congratulate ourselves for having taken measures that ensured that Africa did not become the major victim of this pandemic. Here back home, we need to congratulate ourselves as Kenyans. I want to congratulate the Kenyan people for their patience, their resilience, and caring toward each other. This has helped us to reach this far. Also, we need to convey our condolences to families who have lost their loved ones, and to say that may the Lord rest their soul in eternal peace. We also want to congratulate our medical personnel who have been very diligent in their service to our in a very risky line of duty. They have exhibited a sense of patriotism that is unique. Therefore, we need to congratulate them. Some of them have lost their lives in the process of trying to save lives of other Kenyans. We also want to congratulate the Ministry of Health under the leadership of my friend, Honorable Mutai Kagwe, who has continued to guide this country, giving vital information to our people, what needs to be done during this period of time. They may not have been perfect, but nowhere in the world have they in any country been perfect dealing with this. So we thank them and congratulate them. Then our religious leaders who heeded the call by the government and shut the institutions of worship, whether they are churches, mosques, or temples. We know the kind of stress that this imposed on them. But then they also saw that they had a duty to protect lives of our people. We want to congratulate them. But this pandemic has also produced young heroes in our country. The innovators, young innovators. We have people who are able to produce ventilators, beds, masks, PPEs, and so on in this period of time. It really shows a sense of innovation that our people have, and that given an opportunity, our people can excel just along the other youth in the world. Then we want to also thank our small-scale farmers. Let's remember them. Those who produce cassava, potatoes, fruits, maize, millet, chicken, and so on, who have continued to serve our cities and towns during this period of epidemic. From Busia to Kitui, to Mandera, to all over the place, they've done commendable work. Then we have also our truck and van drivers, border riders, who have provided a critical link between the production and consumption supply chain. Some of them have been doing this thing at great risk to their personal safety. But there's something that we have learned from this, Mr. President. Our reliance on imports in our country is risky and dangerous. When the world shuts down, like the world is shut down, you find yourself in a situation where you're completely helpless. That's the reason why we're saying that made in Kenya and made for Kenya should not just be a slogan, but it must be something that we want to realize. That we must begin to manufacture certain essential things like pharmaceutical products, food products, things like textiles and so on, we need to produce in our country. And that we should move away from our reliance on imports of essential things. We must have a national list of essential goods and products that must be produced locally. Finally, President, the youth of Kenya, during this period of time, have exhibited exceptional sense of unity and patriotism. Here I want to thank the government for coming up with this Kazi Mashinani, which has provided essential jobs for our youths, which are productive. The President, we need all the time to continue to have this conversation on how to expand our national cake. That our national cake must expand so that we can be able to feed most of our people. The reality is that our population continues to grow exponentially, but we are not producing enough to be able to feed our people. There's too much concern about consumption, taking away from the national cake than expanding the national cake. This itself is actually a recipe for disaster. We must see that this national cake is expanded rather than just taking off from it and going to give it away from other people as alms, throwing it to other people's alms. This is a conversation that we're going to have on another day. But I want to conclude first by thanking the government, the President, for leading from the front during this very difficult period. It has been very difficult to meet physically, like Honorable Ndavadi said, because we don't want the source of infection. It has been difficult, but I'm sure we will manage there, and I hope that we're going to continue to manage going forward. I thank you.
Your Excellency, distinguished participants, I request the gentleman up front to remain seated there for the next few minutes. On behalf of my colleagues, both in the National Emergency Response Committee, my colleagues in Cabinet, and the entirety of the executive branch of government that has worked together with our colleagues in the Council of Governors together. Your Excellency, we are very grateful for the opportunity, and we thank you so much for putting this meeting together. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to that point that we have all been waiting for, and it's now my distinct pleasure and privilege to request you please to be upstanding as I invite His Excellency, our President, to speak to us and bring this meeting to an end. Your Excellency, sir.
Thank you. Please be seated. Thank you very much. Fellow Kenyans and conference participants, my greetings once again. But before I begin with my concluding remarks, I would want to request that each and every one of us stand for a minute of silence for the 700 Kenyans whom we have lost during this period. May God give them eternal rest. Thank you very much. Let me once again say how delighted I am today as we conference together, bringing teams from across the country and across the different sectors, teams that have shaped our national response to the coronavirus pandemic. In your different capacities, either as leaders, clergy, technocrats, doctors, civil society, different experts, private sector, you have all helped the country navigate through the turns and twists of the corona crisis for the last 6 months and brought us within sight of safe harbor. Indeed, the panel discussions held this afternoon have highlighted both the hits as well as the misses in our national endeavor to flatten the infection curve and overall We have all demonstrated resilience in the face of tremendous challenge. I join all speakers and participants today in celebrating our gallant health workers and all our essential service providers for keeping the Kenyan flame burning bright. Today, we honor and salute them all and recognize their representatives who are in our midst at this conference. Asanteni sana kwenu nyote. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, even as we mourn for our compatriots whom we have lost to this disease, we are eternally grateful also to God for our survivors and the recoveries. Each death is undoubtedly a tragedy, but every recovery is also a story of heroic triumph. And I am confident that as a nation, we will stay the course for the remainder of this journey and reach our desired end. For your efforts, I want to once again thank each and every one of you collectively, as well as individually, on behalf of the people and the government of the Republic of Kenya, and indeed on my own behalf. Ladies and gentlemen, for the last 6 months, the country has been in a season of paradox. Since March this year, when we recorded the first COVID-19 case, it became necessary to shut down the economy in order to save it. We had to avoid our loved ones, especially the elderly, because we care for their health just as much as we cherish their wisdom. And it became necessary to withdraw our children from schools in order to secure their future. All this was a paradox, a conflict between the new normal and what we think the normal should be. Today, however, we face an even greater paradox. As we flatten the corona curve, it appears like victory is on sight. Yes, indeed, the COVID positivity rate has fallen from 13% in June to 7% in August, and now stands at 4.4%. With these figures, we can all be tempted to celebrate, more so because we are now below the 5% positivity rate recommended by the World Health Organization for reopening. Yet these achievements are a paradox in themselves. And I say so because the greatest danger is always at that moment of victory. In fact, experience has taught us that we are most vulnerable and fragile at the moment where we think we have won. Indeed, as my brother, the Honorable Musalia Mudavadi, said, I'm not saying this to belittle the achievements that we have made, but just, indeed, as he told us, only asking us to incline on the side of caution. If we have won one battle against COVID-19, we have not yet won the war. The possibility of a second wave of this pandemic is real, as we have seen in other countries. As an affirmation that the enemy is still within our borders, we continue to record new infections every day, even as we speak. And in that regard, to forestall what is happening elsewhere, we must continue adhering to the protocols issued by the Ministry of Health. But we have also seen successes, and I am particularly delighted by the advances that we have made in the health sector. When we were hit with this pandemic in March this year, we only had 8 infectious disease isolation beds countrywide. 7 days exactly after the first COVID case was reported, we were able to increase this bed capacity to 60. Currently, and working in partnership with county governments,
we have over 300 ICU beds and 7,411 isolation beds nationally. And this done in 6 months. These achievements are indeed phenomenal. And through you, Governor Oparanya, Chair of Council of Governors, I take this opportunity to thank you for the partnership that you and your governors have shown during this very difficult period of time. In fact, in this period of 6 months, we have actually installed more medical equipment than has ever happened since our country's independence. As an affirmation of our expanding capacity, and as we continue to use this moment to reimagine Kenya's healthcare, earlier this month, I presided over the official opening of our 5th National Referral Hospital, the KU Teaching Referral and Research Hospital. The new facility is part of our national response for specialized treatment of chronic diseases, notably cancer and renal diseases, the twin diseases that have caused and wreaked havoc to many families across the nation. In that regard, once the KU Integrated Molecular Imaging Center is completed by March of next year, there will no longer be need for any Kenyan to travel abroad in search for specialized treatment, cancer treatment, as our enhanced capacity will be able to handle any medical conditions that people now are currently traveling abroad for. Indeed, the referral facilities, coupled with the expanding county infrastructure, will enhance our national possibilities and anchor our plans to position our nation as a top medical hub for our region, for the continent, and indeed develop medical tourism as a new area of generating income and jobs for our people. This will also help us with our national rollout for the universal health care under the Big Four agenda. So, fellow Kenyans, our expanded health infrastructure, as I've just mentioned, is indeed impressive. However, it is important to question ourselves and ask ourselves, does it make our position unassailable if a second wave were to hit us? Is it sufficient a buffer to keep a second wave at bay? The answer to this question is a resounding no. The expanded infrastructure is necessary, but still not sufficient. Without citizen action, the impressive infrastructure cannot forestall the aggression of a second wave, as I said, as we have seen in other countries. So to buffer the country, therefore, the citizens must, as they have been, position themselves as the first line of defense. The reason why we have managed to flatten the curve is because Kenyans have exercised an impressive civic responsibility and duty. And if danger is most present in moments of victory, this achievement is in danger if we do not watch out. And that is why I urge all Kenyans to double their efforts in observing the COVID protocols. We have got this far because we, the citizens, were the first line of defense against the pandemic. And as we get into the next phase of the war against this pandemic, we must heed the teachings of St. Francis of Assisi, who said, and I quote, "Start by doing what is necessary, then it will lead you to what is possible, and before you know it, you will find yourself doing the impossible." End of quote. If we do what is necessary during the next phase of the war against the pandemic, it will lead us to do what is possible. Then cumulatively, our necessary actions like wearing masks, coupled with our possible deeds, will lead us to the impossible outcome of containing this pandemic. Indeed, as a people, we must always remember that impossible is nothing if each and every one of us applies themselves. So therefore, in the spirit of co-creating the new normal between the government and its people, and on the advice of the National Security Council, and in line with the recommendations of the National Emergency Committee on the coronavirus pandemic, I direct and announce as follows. 1, that the nationwide curfew enforced throughout the territory of the Republic of Kenya is extended for a further 60 days. 2, that the commencement time for the nationwide curfew is varied from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Therefore, effective tomorrow, Tuesday, the 29th of September 2020, the nationwide dusk to dawn curfew will run from 11 o'clock at night to 4 o'clock in the morning. 3, that the prohibition against the operation of bars and the prohibition against the sale of alcoholic drinks and beverages by ordinary restaurants and eateries shall stand vacated with effect from the 29th of September 2020. Unaweza kukunywa pombe, sawa. 4, that the closing time for all bars and restaurants and eateries shall be 10 p.m. every day with effect from the 29th of September 2020, and their operations shall be with strict adherence to the applicable guidelines and protocols issued by the Ministry of Health. 5, that in line with the recommendations of the Interfaith Council, the permitted maximum size of religious gatherings is increased to 1/3 of its normal sitting capacity, but with strict adherence to all applicable guidelines and protocols issued by the Ministry of Health. 6, that the permitted maximum number of persons attending funerals and weddings is reviewed upwards from 100 to 200, but with strict adherence to all applicable guidelines and protocols issued by the Ministry of Health. And indeed, once again, going back to the Honorable Musalia Mudavadi, he posed a question. We thank Kenyans, but it is we, the political class especially, that is leading the charge in defying laid down protocol. So hii ugonjwa ikiendelea kusambaza, tujiangalie sisi wenyewe mbele ya tuanze kuangalia wananchi. Hiyo nimesema 200, good. As we progressively de-escalate the containment measures and resume a sense of normalcy, on education, our paramount consideration, both as a government, but also as parents, is the safety and well-being of our children. The lives of our children and their health is not a matter for debate. Learning institutions, therefore, should only be reopened when we have and can sufficiently guarantee the safety of all our children. And here, I really would plead with Kenyans, let us not focus ourselves on when schools will reopen, but how shall these schools open in a manner that protects our children and protects their lives and their health. Tafadhali, tusiwe tunapigana juu ya mambo ambaye, let us think first about their health and well-being, and once we have established how, then together we will agree when. So therefore, The resumption of in-person learning must be predicated on strict adherence to the health protocols and guidelines as issued by the Ministry of Health. So therefore, I call upon the Cabinet Secretary for Education, once we have agreed on the how, he will thereafter immediately issue a calendar for the resumption of the 2020 academic year, if it is to be, or if it is going to be 2021. Hiyo ni kulingana na directives na vile tutakubaliana how. As I give these directives, I underscore the need to continue adhering to the health guidelines and protocols to avoid losing the gains we have made thus far. And to also say again that I will not hesitate to escalate containment measures in the event that any of these indicators that we know start to rise again. So fellow Kenyans and conference participants, the containment measures put in place in March of 2020 to stem the spread of COVID-19 have had positive returns in terms of our safety and national security. This is something most people have not actually noted. In the 6 months since we started the containment measures, crime has exhibited a 21% average decline, and traffic accidents have reduced by an average of 10%. So with that, I want to conclude with some thoughts for all of us. As I said, especially with regard to our economy, and as I said earlier, that we are living in a season of paradox, an age where our new reality is a conflict with what we feel reality should be. Indeed, that is not only true of our social lives, but also true of our economy. Against all odds, as we have seen and heard today, some of our entrepreneurs have remanaged and reimagined the subsisting pandemic and created a new business reality that disorganizes the existing order at play. This is a new business model driven by innovators and makers of things, people who did not see danger in the COVID crisis, but actually saw an opportunity. Businesses that experienced shock from COVID, but bounced back better. But the question that this development begs is the following. If positive disruptions and innovations have mushroomed during COVID-19, how do we together support them as part of our resilience building strategy? How do we boost a small samosa delivery company known as Wow Eats, whose recipe is hundreds of years old, for instance? How do we encourage the Association of Women in Agriculture with their innovative work, especially amongst vulnerable, informal settlement women across the country? How do we assist this kind of people? During the first phase of this pandemic, we rolled out a series of economic stimulus packages, and today, in support of our small businesses and innovators, I also direct as follows. One, that the National Treasury considers retaining the VAT at 14% until the 1st of July 2021. Two, that the National Treasury considers retaining the income tax rate, pay as you earn, at 25% until the 1st of January 2021. Three, that the National Treasury considers retaining the resident income tax, which is corporate tax, at 25% until the 1st of January 2021. And four, that to continue
cushioning low-income earners, the National Treasury maintains the 100% tax relief for persons earning a gross monthly income of up to Kenya shillings 24,000 beyond the sunset date of 31st December 2020. 5, that to continue cushioning our micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, the National Treasury considers maintaining the reduction of the current turnover tax from 3% to 1% for all micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. And 6, to enhance access to credit for our micro, small, and medium enterprises, the National Treasury is directed to expedite the ongoing rollout of the Credit Guarantee Scheme in partnership with participating banks as well as our development partners. The Credit Guarantee Scheme, as approved by Cabinet, is a risk-sharing partnership between the government and the banks, which will afford our enterprises across the country access credit and would increase the amounts that we can lend to this sector by an additional 100 billion shillings. So, fellow Kenyans, when COVID pandemic hit us in March this year, we did not know the extent of the crisis. In between the crisis, I told you that we were in what I was calling the fog of war. The theaters of war were invisible and indeed foggy. However, today, I am comforted by the fact that we are not running in the dark. We might not know everything about the pandemic, but we do know a lot more than we did in March. And although we only know in part, we are better prepared today than we were in March this year. Our level of civic consciousness and responsibility is much higher. However, to build the resilience that allows us to participate or to anticipate the second wave and respond to it, we must do even better. That is why I must emphasize by repeating what St. Francis of Assisi taught us. If we all do the necessary, it will lead to the possible, and indeed at this point, the possible will happen without even us realizing it. Starting the next phase of this pandemic by doing the necessary and working together in unity as we have done, this is how to defeat this COVID menace, and I do believe that through that unity of purpose, we can indeed succeed. I want to once again thank Kenyans across the country. I want to thank all leaders across the country for the manner in which we have been able to work very closely together despite the fact that we have been apart. If it was not for that working together, we would not be where we are. We would not have achieved what we have achieved. I continue to urge you to work together, continue to partner together, and I am certain that that way is the surest way, not only to defeat this pandemic, but also to ensure that we build a prosperous, equitable society in which every single Kenyan feels a part and not a single one of us feels left behind. I thank you. May God bless you, and may God continue to bless this great Republic of Kenya. Asanteni sana. Thank you.
Asante. Naomba sote tusimame wima kwa wimbo wa taifa.
Thank you very much. We remain standing as His Excellency the President leaves at his pleasure.